What's good, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Behind the Door podcast with your boys, Jeremy Hilton, Brandon Brown. And we're excited to be back, excited that you're listening and supporting. Thank you very much. And today we're going to get into a topic that, depending on where you are in your life and what circle you're talking about it in, can be a little bit heavy. But we're going to leave the politics and the divisiveness that exists in our world out of it and just acknowledge that we have a president of the United States of America right now who's a felon, and that means something for people like Jeremy and I, many of you who are listening, and honestly just millions and millions and millions of people across this country should care about the fact that we have a felon for a president. And it's become a little bit of a divisive topic. I'm sure that we've all seen, like, some people are criticizing that we have a felon for a president. I think that's more a stance of their personal opinion on the man himself. For me, it's an exciting time that we have a felon for a president. I personally am not a fan of our president. I can name that. I don't support him as a person or an individual, but it brings up a very important topic about the rights of people who have criminal records and basically what the rest of us are missing, despite the fact that we have somebody with a current felony record who's sitting as the president of the United States. So, Jeremy, I'll kick it over to you just to get us started about some of your thoughts, because this is something we were talking about, and I think it's really important for people to kind of consider and get into what are our next steps now that, this is our reality.
Well, from our seat, it's a pretty interesting scenario in a lot of ways, because there is two sides of it, right? Do we view it as a victory that we have a felon in office, and it's somebody that's going to champion prison reform, and you know what I mean, like, and I'm not one to cry about my situations that I've been in my life, but like, I couldn't coach my son's basketball team at one point because I had a felony. I couldn't. There's been several times, and that I was going to get a job, and I start a job, and then they come back to me later on and fire me because of my past.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is hard. It's like I don't want to, like, it's progression but I also think that probably most of my problems at that time, if I had a little bit of money, I probably wouldn't have the same problems.
Yeah, that's, a huge part of it, right? Like, I've been thinking about this a lot. I saw on Facebook before the election a whole lot of people posting and sharing posts and exchanging information about the fact that, if you can even vote for a felon to be president.
I guess that's the thing, is that, like, so then you look back and go, how can, like, most states in our country can't vote if you have a felony?
Yeah.
And then it presents that, like, thing where it's like, but you can be a felon to run for the
be
president
voted for
and be in office.
Yeah.
But you can't actually vote or cast a vote.
Yeah.
If you live in a state that doesn't have felons that could vote.
Yeah. And just to name it, currently there's only 2 states in the United States where you can actually vote while you're in prison, and that's Maine and Vermont. And there's a whole bunch of states. It's actually, I don't have the like information off the top of my head, but the majority of states have laws that bar you from voting as a felon while you're still in the system. So, like, if you're on probation, you can't vote. And a handful of states, if you're a felon, you can never vote again, right? So it is a super important topic that we, in this country, that's been law for a very long time. We have a long history of disenfranchising voters, but you could vote for a president who is a felon as a non-felon.
Well, the other thing that is very interesting to me around this particular thing is that in this presidency, this election, Latino and Black men came to the polls in droves, which is the same demographic that has been unfairly has been unfairly treated around felonies and that becoming barriers and the mass incarceration that's happened. So it feels like it feels like there's a discrepancy, I guess, or almost a cognitive dissonance around how we interpret this as a whole, I think.
Yeah. It's a weird thing that we have to name, right? So like, and it's just something that I can't wrap my head around, the certain demographics of people in our country who voted for our current president. But again, that's because I'm not a supporter. I didn't vote for Trump. And it's just, on a personal level, how I feel about some of his like attitudes and beliefs and actions make it so that I just can't support somebody like that, right? And it doesn't matter that he's a Republican, and it doesn't matter that he's a felon. Like, none of those things matter. It's just the quality of somebody's character that I care about the most. And so it is hard for me to understand why so many people in our country voted for somebody. But with that being said, I'm also not somebody who like is so divided in my politics that I like can't have a conversation with somebody about it. And I'm somebody who tries to put myself in other people's shoes.
Well, this piece isn't necessarily about politics, right?
Exactly.
We're sitting there looking at it and we're saying, okay, I am a felon, and I have had tons of barriers in my life related to these felonies. It's a thing that like people talk about constantly.
Yeah.
Is like, I can't get work, I can't get housing, I can't get these things because I have these barriers.
Yeah.
And then we witnessed and like it or not, he's not president no matter what. He's the president of the United States no matter what. There's nothing. That's not the point, right? Though, but the point for me though is that it's what is the message? How do you interpret that? As somebody that's struggling with their criminal records and things like that, and
how do you reconcile with the fact that you can be president but you can't get housing support, or you can be president but it's going to be really hard to get a basic low income job, or you can be president but you can be also legally discriminated against in most facets of your life, right? And so what it boils down to is like we have to have a conversation around wealth distribution and class, and the fact that how people with money and people with status experience the system is a lot different than how the 95% of people in the system who are poor and who are disadvantaged.
Well, could you imagine becoming the boss of the people that investigated your crimes?
That's wild. That's crazy.
And then being able to have the authority and actually carrying out terminating them.
And also while your investigations are still ongoing.
We'll just terminate them. And so there's like a lot of it to me that I go, how come, honestly, I think about it and I go, how come I got, you know what I mean? Like, how come I had to go through all this stuff and struggle so much when you really just don't have to be like, there's no, it seems like, the thing that changed me in my life, I guess, was accountability, you know what I'm saying? And those types of things. And I feel like our justice system is, supposedly based on the accountability and the justice, you know what I mean? Like it's supposed to be based on fairness, right? And so that, to me, this isn't about politics, but it challenges the fairness of our system, because it's like glaring that it's wealth that
and power.
Wealth and power and those types of things. So it doesn't necessarily matter.
Yeah.
Really, like what the crime is, as long as you're able to like, navigate it and pay your way out of it, you know what I mean? Like things can be different for you.
Or just manipulate it. And that's one of the truths of our system, is that the system is designed in a way where, like, we've talked about this in previous episodes about how like being in prison kind of forces you to become manipulative. But like that happens way before you go to prison, because like, especially if you're going to trial or you're in the process of pleading out to something, Like, the whole system is designed around manipulation. Like, how can the defense manipulate the story to look this way? How can the prosecution manipulate the story to look that way? And it's never been about facts, and it's never been about truth. It's always about the story that we can create. And this is interesting because with Donald Trump's presidency, a lot of Trump supporters will say that it was unfair that he was ever charged with these crimes anyway, because it was based on a rigged election, or it was based on this, it was based on that. And like, I just want to name for anybody, regardless of what you feel about, you know, our president's criminal charges, that's pretty much everybody's experience in the system, right? Even for those of us who I committed a crime, right? I did something that I wish I could take back. It was horrible. I hurt somebody very bad, but my trial was not based on truth. It was not based on facts. So I can actually relate to every other person, regardless of what their political and personal beliefs are, who have gone through the system and felt that it was unfair. The difference is, because I'm not rich, because I'm not powerful, because I don't have any social status when I was 21.
It was just, that's always we had to go through to get off when you went to the hearing and everything.
Terminating my probation.
Yeah, it was just it's a process. All these things are very arduous processes for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And like, so some people just get to ignore that process and just say I'm not participating.
Yeah, they don't have to worry about it at all. They can pay people.
I'm just not participating anymore, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, here's the interesting thing, I think, you know, when we started talking about this topic and why it felt really important is, like, for me, the biggest thing is I have, you know, and I feel like it's misplaced most days when I wake up, but I have hope. You know, and this is if you are a Trump supporter, if you are a conservative or a Republican, and you feel happy that our country has the, you know, political scheme it has right now, and you're also a felon, what I hope that you're paying a lot of attention to and asking questions about and generating conversation about is what's going to change for us as a population, right? I saw something very fascinating on Facebook the other day from somebody that I actually really, really respect. And what the person put on Facebook, they shared like a meme that was going around about the fact that one of Trump's cabinet picks, and I don't remember the name because I don't pay a lot of attention to politics these days, but one of his cabinet picks is a recovering heroin addict, right? And they were outraged by that. Like, oh, this is outrageous that we could have a recovering heroin addict in charge of this and this and this. And for me, I felt, you know, kind of sad and a little bit ashamed of that person, because the fact that the person is a recovering heroin addict shouldn't matter. They're a recovering heroin addict, right? The fact that our president is a felon shouldn't matter. If you have an opinion on him, it should be based on your like morals and your beliefs. But we should normalize in this society, now that we do have somebody who's a felon as president, that we actually have to talk about our rights collectively.
Well, so here's the deal, is that it's not the fact that he is like a felon in office, right? For me, that's not it. For me, it's like how do you get how does our system is so unfair to so many millions of people? And then that same system, it's the same system.
Yeah.
Right? It's the same thing.
Well, we've learned through this that you're punished for being poor, right? And if this was ever a question for anybody in the world about the U.S. criminal legal system, we've learned through the last year or two that 100%, if you are involved,
but it's also like the Republican, and this is not political, like I said, but historically the Republican Party has been tough on crime, and you know, they led a charge around mass incarceration going all the way back into the 70s. Richard Nixon, right? Ronald Reagan, like these guys really sent a message to that we are literally at war with people using drugs. Well, the war on drugs, right? Start locking everybody up, the whole thing, right? Well, how did we get from that to a felon getting enough people to vote for him out of the same party that has been so tough on crime and so, you know what I mean? Like, it's been the blue line, right? Like, you know, there's just a lot of like, the message to me is like so mixed around it, right? So like, really, we have a group of people that say, this is what we want, right? We want to be tough on crime. We want no nonsense, right? We don't want people to get anything for free. We're tough on these different issues, right? But then we're going to look away from this particular thing because they line up with my values.
And so this is what it's, it's interesting because you say that the messaging has become like very confusing. And to me, it's actually that the messaging has become very clear. And this is what I want everybody who's listening to understand is that if you ever believed that tough on crime was about crime, today you should know that it's not. It's about tough on poverty. It's about tough on poor people, disadvantaged people, because how we experience the system is way different than how anybody with money and status experiences the system. And so, like you said, the Republican Party historically, going back 50 years, has had these policies that have not criminalized actions. They've criminalized people, right? They've criminalized poor people, black people, immigrant people. But if you're a rich white guy specifically, or just really a rich person, right? Whether you're a black woman, if you've got $10 million in the bank and you get arrested for a crime as a black woman, you're going to be treated much different than a black woman arrested for the same crime with $10 in the bank. And this election and our current reality in this country has proven, it has completely added clarity to the message that a lot of the things we believed about crime and justice are false, right? Because we have a president with a lot of felony counts who's sitting in office, a rich white guy. And my question now to anybody.
Well, the other thing that makes the other message that is confusing to me is that I was able to get work and do all this stuff after everything was resolved in my cases, like they had come to a conclusion.
Yeah, you finished your sentence.
The case was dispositioned.
Yeah,
right. It had a resolution, and right now it's Nicole's been looking for. She has a application into the state of Maine to get a CADC, but she can't actually do that until she's off probation.
Yeah.
So her case isn't resolved.
Yeah, so
she can't get work because her case isn't resolved.
Yeah.
But then there's a literally sitting president that has 36 cases, I believe, felonies that aren't resolved. And he is going to be making decisions for her from that position. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't. That's what I'm saying. The messaging and how we landed here doesn't, like you say, I guess it is clear, but at the end of the day, it doesn't make any sense. Like really on an individual basis, how like we as an American people chose this path for our country.
And the part that is like really crucial and matters the most to me is like, and this is what I hope, that Trump supporters specifically, that we can like engage in conversations about over the next 4 years is, are you just so enamored with the man that you can look past everything? Or are you like saying that you can be a felon and still lead? You can be a felon and still do something great? Because that's the question that
you can't have that message and be like, this is a wrongful conviction anyway.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you don't believe that, we couldn't look and go, okay, because if no one believes he actually committed a crime, then it isn't like this is just is just semantics.
But even those folks, even if you believe that all of his experience in the criminal legal system in our country is sham, if you believe that it's wrong, he never should have been charged with anything, he never should have had to go through a trial, then you also have to recognize that a poor person anywhere in the country can and does have the same experience.
You also got to go, and then even in that same, it's like you also have to acknowledge that there's a lot of people that are in prisons and jails and that have been wrongfully convicted.
Exactly.
And if like you can look past here, you can look past there, you got to get them out. You know what I mean? We got to get people out of prison.
And so that's what it really boils down to me. Like the heart of this conversation for me, despite all my own personal beliefs and all my own political beliefs and all those things, the heart of the conversation is, no matter how you feel about Donald Trump and his experience in the criminal legal system, one way or another, anywhere in the middle, what we have recognized is that our system is fundamentally flawed. And so what I am paying attention to, and what I hope everybody else is paying attention to for the next 3 years and change, is what is going to be done about our system now that we have somebody who has experienced it, who has dozens of felony charges and misdemeanor charges. Regardless of where you stand on the issue, we have to agree that our system has to be fixed. And primarily, the most glaring and obvious thing we have to fix, there's hundreds of things we have to fix, but the one that should be talked about every single day until it has been changed, is we have a felon sitting in the seat of the president, and we have tens of millions of felons who cannot vote, right? And
so that's what I'm saying. Right out, if that's like, everybody should have a right to vote as a felon now that there's a president that
100%.
has felons.
That should have been an executive order signed on day one.
Day one, right out the gate. Like, that's
100%.
That's really what I thought was like going to happen. But it's almost like, Maine, there's legalized cannabis, and now there's shops everywhere. But I know, more people than I can count on my two hands that are sitting in prison for selling weed. It feels like this, like when that became legal, boom, you let everybody out there. You know what I mean? Like, let's just get to the other side of it, because our society is saying it's okay.
Yeah.
Right. So now that there's a president that's sitting in office as a felony, you should you should literally make it against the law to even ask if you have a felony.
Yeah.
Like, you couldn't even be able to run a background check on something. I mean, it's like, if we don't care as a society about the felonies, that's what we're saying, because we elected this.
Yeah.
That means that, like, people should be able to, like, it should, like, the record should be sealed up. We shouldn't even be using them anymore.
It should go away immediately. And this is, I guess, like, I talk to a lot of my friends who are Trump supporters, right? Who do identify as conservatives or Republicans, and who also have felony records. And like, I always respect somebody's, choice in what their values politically are. But when I talk to my friends, what I try to really stress to them is, like, how are you going to feel if in the next 4 years it doesn't change? Right? Because that's my thing. And this is why I say, like, the messaging has become clear. The reality has become so clear, and it should be so clear to everybody in this country, regardless of what your background is, how much money you have, what race you are, what religion, what ethnicity, anything, no matter who you are, what you look like, how you exist in this world. It should become very clear, based on the next 3 and some odd years, what our system is designed to do based on what advancements we make and reforms we make. Because if 4 years from now it is not legal for every felon in this country to vote, and we had a president who is a felon, and we had more than half of Americans who voted for that felon, right? If we do not have our voting rights restored, if we do not have our housing rights restored, if we do not see a steep decline in the legal discrimination that we face as felons, then we know what the system is about. It's about poor people versus rich people. That's it. And so, like, my whole thing that I hope everybody considers, and anybody who's listening to this podcast, regardless of how you feel about our president and politics or anything, what I hope you're starting to consider is that statement. If things do not change in the next 4 years, if we do not see a wave of reforms come through our system, led by the president and the federal government, what does it say about our country, our history, the history of our criminal legal system, and the current status of it? That's all I think about. I think about it all day long, every day. I have friends who are homeless right now because they cannot find housing because of their felony record. And yet we have a whole bunch of people in Washington being put into positions from a president who's a felon, who also have the same social statuses as felons, recovering addicts, whatever.
I was just like, I just wanted to make sure I knew what I was talking about. But So Biden had, and this is, like I said, it's not political, but he had ended the contracts with the privatized prisons in the federal government, and that is actually one of the things that he did on I think it was January 20th that he reinstated the order. He reversed Biden's order that eliminated Department of Justice contracts with privatized prisons.
So now we have a felon president.
Well, it's so one of the things that we know is that Donald Trump has investments in privatized prisons. That is a fact, right? He's a felon. You know what I mean? So it's like there's a lot of things around it that's like, what is the message to us? You know what I'm saying? Like, what is the message to me and the people that I help? You know what I mean? Like, and how do you? And there's a lot of things that it's like, how do you like? We can't like. I have felt so disenfranchised from the whole thing for the last several elections in a lot of ways. Myself, it's this. So this is not necessarily political. It's like, how am I actually going to be able to like see a path forward in terms of helping people transition and re-enter into society when the message is so jumbled? Like, where is the help? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And now it seems unclear about where that help is actually going to be coming from. So everything is up in the air, right? It's everything is so up in the air, and it feels like it's there's not going to be many answers moving forward, right? Like, because what you're saying, we can say this in an indignant way, like in 4 years, like we have to have this stuff, right? But you and I both know that is not going to happen.
Yeah, probably not.
Right? We all know that, like, I know that these things, we are not going to get more protections. We're not going to get more
things like
support, right? Well, to be, I don't,
the deep irony.
At the end of the day, I don't, it's government that controls the prison system.
But a felon
And so
controls the
what
government.
I'm saying though is the government controls the prison system, which controls the laws, the judges, the whole thing, the president, the whole thing, right, controls the prisons. The prisons produce way too much money for us to ever get rights back, no matter who's the president of the United States, no matter if they have a felony, no felony, Democrat, Republican, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't actually matter, like, in a lot of ways. Our society, the way this has happened, is our society is so, like,
brainwashed about crime.
This is crime. You're bad. You're a bad person. Go away. Throw away the key. There's no, right? Because that's what we've been sold for so long.
Even though we have countless, like thousands, tens of thousands of examples of people who committed horribly heinous crimes when they were young and are now, and served 10, 20, 30, 40 years in prison, are now pillars of their community.
Well, that boy Larry Miller, man, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
He's
the CEO, the chairman to the advisory board for Brand Jordan. He was a former manager of the Portland Trail. He's done amazing things with his life, and he's a throwaway for society. And for our system, thinks that you're the person, you're a super predator, but based on that,
feels like that same message comes from the same. And this is where this is where it gets confusing for me, because that same message comes from the same party that elects this convicted felon. That's where that narrative, in a lot of ways, is driven from.
Yeah. And it's like,
so how can you say this and then go, okay, and then okay, boom, we're putting. Yeah. Oh no, it's because it's not true, and none of it's true. The system rigged them, but okay, if the system rigged this guy,
how many more millions?
Well, how come you didn't believe? How come it's true for everybody else on the planet?
Because they didn't have the power and the money to influence the process, right? And like, I think you're 100% right. I'm not hopeless. I will say that. I try to live my life regardless of what's
realistic and hopeless are two, right? 100% different things.
I am very realistic, and I'm not hopeless. And the reason I'm not hopeless is because although I do not believe we will see any substantive reforms come down for our people, right? I don't believe we will. I think we're actually going to see the opposite, just based on some of the things that our president has done in the last 2 weeks, trying to cut funding where in the fields where most of my felon friends work, right? I got messages from 30 people the day he signed that executive order where people are like, I'm about to be out of a job because I work in a federally funded field in recovery, or I work in a federally funded field in reentry, and he just cut all of our funding, and now we're going to be out of money. Even some of the projects that I'm part of that are about shifting the reality of our criminal legal system, I got emails saying, we don't know if we're going to be able to pay you now because of this executive order. So I do think that things are going to get worse for us as a people, as a community, as felons, right? As people that are entangled in the system. Where I'm not hopeless, though, is what I really believe, and I hope that people who are listening will go out and have this conversation, is what does it mean 4 years from now if and when that is our reality? Because at some point, we are going to have to stand up, right? Felons in this country, and we're like 30 million strong, right? That's the crazy shit, is we've got millions upon millions upon millions of people with criminal histories and criminal records in this country. And at what point are we going to say enough is enough? We had a felon president who couldn't change our reality. We had cabinet members that he elected who were felons, who were recovering addicts, who were just like us, except they had money and power, right? And at what point are we finally going to go back to like the 60s and say we need a new civil rights movement, right? We know now, we have seen very clearly what the system is about. It's about wealth. It's about power. It's about whiteness. All those things are going to become so clear in the next 4 years if we don't see reforms. And so, like, my question to everybody is, whether you're a conservative Republican or a liberal Democrat, or you fall somewhere in between, what are you going to do if our world does not change for people who have been entangled in the criminal legal system? Because my like plea is, you got to stand up. You got to talk about it. We got to have this conversation, and not in a divisive way. I don't relate to Trump supporters at all when it comes to the politics of that, when it comes to, and I could go on and tell you why, but it's not important. But I can relate to those people about this topic. I can relate to Trump supporters about other topics, but in the grand scheme, we see very differently the world. But when are we going to actually finally just focus on the fact that, like you said, one of our friends and one of our employees, right, cannot progress in her education and her professional life because she's still on probation? I was not allowed to go see my daughter be born. I was barred legally from being at my daughter's birth because I was on probation. And we have a president who is unsentenced for dozens of felony counts. Something has to change. It has to. And if it doesn't, it's time for us to say, we're not taking no for an answer, regardless of who the next president is, who the next governor is.
But what does that look like? You know what I mean? Like, what does that look like? Because our country made a decision that this is the way we were going, right? And it always does at every election cycle, right? Like, we make our decision, like, this is where we're at right now. And for whatever reason, this is where we're at right now.
Yeah.
Right? Because the money trail around this thing has been apparent, right?
It's wild.
Like, the conditions, billions have been apparent, right?
Yeah.
You can find videos on YouTube around the most aggressive prisons in the country, gang violence, this, that, right? Like, we know for a fact our prison system is decaying our country, right? We know that. And it's like, it's not a secret that Trump has been a investor in privatized prisons. That's not a secret, right? So it's like, not taking no for an answer. We've been taking no for an answer this, like, for as long since they started prisons. You know what I mean? Because the fact of the matter is that there's too much money in warehousing people. For us to, it's like, for it to not to be able to change, right? Like, it's the message to me says very, very clearly that, like, it doesn't matter. Like, like you're saying, if you have money, if you have a good attorney, like that's always been present. That whole thing. I mean, some people, like you said, I'm sitting in the county jail for this charge. This guy comes into the county jail, he bails out, he's gone. You know what I mean? Right? Like domestic violence, right? People are literally getting terrorized for things that are, and the justice system doesn't stop it from happening, right? That it just continues to happen. That's why Maine in particular leads our country in domestic violence, deaths and stuff like that. It's a pretty, but you see the way the system's working, right? And it's like, how do you actually combat the money aspect of it, the financial gain of everybody involved, the state, the federal government, they're all benefiting off it.
Well, here's the interesting part about the financial components is if you actually look at who's suffering financially from prisons, it's a lot more people than who are benefiting, right? And so and this is, I think, the reality you've been naming it too, about the fact that we have a lot of people in power right now in our government who make a shit ton of money off of prison, right? But like,
You
if
think
there's
about it.
so few of them, like the people that have these stakes in our private prisons, the people that have these, if you haven't seen the movie 13th, the documentary 13th, watch it, because you will see very clearly how a very small group of people benefit financially from our prison system, not just the privatized prison system, but, politicians that have contracts with organizations that make millions and millions of dollars by supplying prisons something, right? And like politicians are pushing legislation to increase our prisons, right? To get more people in prison, to grow our prison system because they're making millions of dollars off of prisons. You're 100% right. But the reality is that taxpayers are paying a shit ton of money. The common person, right? Not the people that are getting tax breaks right now who have millions of dollars, who make hundreds of $1,000s a year, like hundreds of $1,000s a year are getting tax breaks. If you make $40,000 a year, $60,000 a year, $20,000 a year, you're paying taxes for our prisons.
Well, that's the thing is
You're losing money.
and a lot of those folks are saying like, are pointing towards people that aren't working, or why are you getting a free college education while you're in prison? You know what I mean? That narrative of like pointing the resentment toward the person trying to come up,
Yeah.
instead of like, okay, well, these people are making all this money and getting tax breaks and all this stuff, all these press. It's like
I'm mad at you, the board
or the messaging, like I said, it gets like, instead of seeing where it's actually coming from, we point the finger at the people that actually need the help the most.
Yeah.
And that's what, and then it's like, okay, so you're actually, you have the same issues as me now, right? You got felonies and stuff like that, but you actually get to be treated much differently than I do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I want to go back to, because when you're saying like the how, right? Like we've been taking no for a very long time, right? Like it's always been no, no, no. And we've seen a lot of people across the country, in states and federally, like really start to push a lot of reforms. I've been super blessed since I got out of prison to participate in a lot of that, like professionally for work. From pretrial reforms to ending cash bail across the country are projects that I've been involved in, sentencing reform. We saw not too long ago some federal Supreme Court rulings about changing the life without parole to juvenile offenders. And we've seen, hundreds, if not thousands of people who were sentenced to life without parole at the age of like 16 get out of prison, because we understand that that's unconstitutional. So we have seen a lot of reforms come under Republicans, under Democrats, under all sorts of different political schemes, right? What I believe is, because I believe this is a unique opportunity for us because we have a felon president. And what I believe primarily is, if we see one thing change, and hopefully this episode reaches thousands and thousands of people who are part of our community, because how many people do you know who are felons in Maine who have the right to vote, but who don't?
Oh, a lot.
I know a lot, right? I know people across this country who are felons who have the right to vote, and who do not. And the reason they do not vote is because they say it's not going to make a difference. And also, when you're just stuck in survival mode as a felon in your
I'm not gonna lie, man. I did not vote in this election because I did not vote, and it's because I feel so disenfranchised. I don't see anybody that matches up to my values. And I
disassociate.
just want to be clear about it. The Democratic Party has invested more money into privatized prisons than the Republicans by far. You know what I mean? So it's like this is a financial issue, not a political.
It's not political.
It's not a political one for me in terms of this, because it doesn't matter who's been the president. It doesn't matter who's been this politician, that politician.
We're still getting
It's not. It hasn't changed. It hasn't changed for decades.
Yeah.
It's actually getting worse in a lot of ways. I think on the sheer number of people that are accessing the criminal legal system. So I think it's actually getting worse in a lot of ways. I was just, I was watching this documentary about this hotel out in Los Angeles, and it was there was a murder involved, and the police was saying, like, we have so many calls for like murders in that Skid Row area, LA, that there's no possible way
We're gonna solve this.
Well, there's you know what I mean? But they're just like, we can't, like, it was so overrun with these crimes that are happening like so often in our these parts of our neighborhoods all across the country are being decimated, right? But it's like it doesn't seem like people actually, there's like not a lot of care for that population of people.
There's a lot of opinions about them.
There's a lot of opinion because it's easy to point the finger at that and say, this is the problem in our country, without actually looking at it and going, there's a major disparity in what is happening for us and what isn't. Like, how can we be the land of the free with almost more laws than any other country in the world?
Yeah.
We're the land of law. We're not the land to be. You know what I mean?
We're the land of the captive.
It's hard to, like, what's that?
We're the land of the captive. We have more people in prison than the rest of the modern world combined.
Right. So it's like hard to wrap in. We have to keep the furnace burning, right? Like, so it's like the United States is a big business, right?
Yeah.
And so any additional revenue that we can generate in terms of that business, they're going to continue to do it. And there's, like, you know what I mean? So that I guess I'm not hopeless. I'm realistic and accepting of the system that we're in. You know what I mean? And part of my work is like, okay, guys, you know what I mean? With the recovery residences, our residential program, part of my goal is to allow people to understand that, like, the way I try to get like change it is to get people to believe that they don't have to be stuck in that system. Because the great thing about the United States is you actually can certainly entrepreneurially, however you like, there is opportunity after you've been down, right? Because if not, you or I wouldn't be sitting here right now.
Yeah.
That is a good part of the country. But it's like, you have to actually literally believe that you are not going to be part of that system anymore in order to get out of it.
Yeah.
And that is sometimes the greatest convincer. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I can do, right? Is try to convince people that they don't have to be stuck in this system anymore. Yeah. And a lot of it is like this illusion, right? These illusion, by that I mean, like, if I'm believing that this felony is going to stop me from getting work, for an example, that it's going to be true.
Yeah.
But if you say, I'm going to find another way around this, that's going to be true too. Like, I don't actually have to believe that I'm a felon for the rest of my life and wear that the way the society, and not only society, but that group of people that elected this felon president have been telling me all these years.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I mean, what I believe in, everybody that I work with, from youth who are in the system to adults who are coming out of the system and everybody in between that I've worked with over the last few years, the message that I always give is exactly what you're talking about. It's a message about storytelling and narrative. Okay, you got a felony. Okay, whatever. You've got a 20 years of addiction and 20 days of recovery under your belt right now, and you're so worried about people judging you for all the bad things. If you can't flip the story, if you can't be willing to talk about whatever it was that led you down these different paths, if you can't be willing to, or you won't be willing to educate yourself about the history of these things so that you can talk about your current reality, then you are going to be trapped in that narrative of, oh, I'm a felon and it's hopeless, right? I'm an addict and it's hopeless. I'm a this, I'm a that, and it's hopeless. And for me, like, this is, I guess, one of the really clear messages about today's episode is also like, we got to start having these conversations. We can't be afraid to talk about them. We can't be afraid to name that, like, certain things are unfair, but at the same time, we can't be afraid to believe that I can tell my life story in a way that actually compels somebody to want to hire me, as opposed to want to get me out of the office during that interview because I'm a felon, right? And, you know, just to kind of wrap this episode up, one of the things that I hope is the most clear message to anybody who's listening, regardless of what your political beliefs are, is if you are a felon, pay attention, right, to what's happening. Because, and like, what it really boils down to this, because I've never met anybody in my time, in almost 13 years of incarceration, and in now 3 years of travel in the country and connecting with people who are formerly, currently incarcerated, and people that are just fighting for our rights. If you have any resentment at all at our criminal legal system, from the smallest to the biggest, if you were wronged in any way by our criminal legal system, pay attention, get involved. We now have a felon who is a president who probably has some resentments about the criminal legal system, right? If he and the people that support him do not make an effort to change our reality, then the next question is, how can we do it ourselves? Because that's what you were just talking about. I just had to take the initiative and do it myself and not be trapped by my felon label and my experience in the system. And that's what I hope people take away from this. And I think this is a conversation we're going to have to come back to often on this platform, to just talk about some of these very specific things, right? Because people are sitting out there wondering, how do I get involved? How can I make a difference? How can I make a change? Well, if a felon can become president, regardless of how many millions of dollars he has and how much power and how much status he has, if a felon can convince more than half of the country to vote for him, even though felons cannot vote, Donald Trump might not have been able to vote. He wouldn't have been able to vote for himself if he was a resident of certain states. He would not have been able to cast a vote for himself.
He couldn't.
Right? So, like, that's what I want people to understand. We can, if we reframe our reality and we acknowledge the truth of where our country is today, that we elected a felon into the seat of the president, it means we can change things. Because if you said 15 years ago, that would have never been possible. So regardless of how you feel about Donald Trump personally, regardless of what your political beliefs are, regardless of anything, for better or worse, 15 years ago, that would not have been possible, which shows us we can change shit. We just have to believe it, and we just have to do it. And we have to generate power, and we might not be able to do it as a community financially, but that doesn't mean we can't do it on the narrative side, right? That doesn't mean we can't do it by showing the vote. If you're a felon and you can vote, please vote. Vote from now on. Vote every single time. Local,